The way is getting narrower. The more we learn about the real Jesus, week after week, the series we're in is called The Real Jesus. The more we learn about the real Jesus, I'm finding this interesting phenomenon. The way gets narrower and narrower and narrower. And what that does sometimes is it weeds people out because they go, I didn't sign up for this. Matthew chapter 7, verse 13, Jesus said this. By the way, Jesus is the way. Enter by the narrow gate, Matthew 7:13. For the gate is wide and the way is easy. Can you say easy with me? Easy. Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy. That leads to what? The American dream. The destruction. And those who enter by it are many. Say many. Popular. It's the popular way that leads to destruction. It is conventional wisdom that leads to destruction. For the gate is narrow and the way is hard. Say hard. That leads to life. And those who find it are few. How many of you ever had someone come to you and say, oh, I know you? Any of you can relate to that? The more people get to know you, if you're some level of public figure, I'm a best-selling author, and I have people come to me sometimes, and they say, oh, yeah, I know you. And I think to myself, no, you don't. You know you've heard my name. Maybe you've known what I've done, but you don't know me. Well, I do. And I would venture to say, I don't even know Asa. My wife knows me. It takes a while to get to know someone, doesn't it? And I would venture to say that the same is true of most people when it comes to Jesus. Oh, I know him. I know who Jesus is. He's the Messiah. I know who he is. Or he's a good guy, or he's a prophet, or he's an influential figure in history. I know who Jesus is. I know Jesus. I know that guy. If you have a Bible, look at where we left off last week, Mark chapter 8, verse 27. And Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way, he asked his disciples, who do people say that I am? And they told him, John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, and others one of the prophets. And he asked them, but who do you say that I am? Peter answered him, you are the Christ. And he strictly charged them to tell no one about him. So the perception about who Jesus was in first century Israel was among the populace, the popular opinion and ideology about who Jesus was. Number one, John the Baptist. Number two, Elijah and others, some of the prophets. Elijah was a prophet, by the way. That's who people thought Jesus was. Do you realize that? When Jesus walked the earth, people did not think of him as God. They did not think of him as the Son of God. They did not think of him as the Messiah. They thought of him as possibly John the Baptist. Maybe he was Elijah or a prophet. That's what they thought about him. But there was confusion at a minimum about who he was. It's really hard to peg Jesus. You think you understand him, and then he does something that surprises you. I thought he was a nice guy. But why is he saying these hard things to me? He loves me, but then he rebukes me. Which is it? Well, all of it's love. So that question that Jesus asked is a very, very important question. The question about who do people say that I am? That question, he's still asking it today. He's asking it of the world. He's also asking that question to Christians. Who do people say that I am? But here in verse 28, John the Baptist, Elijah, some of the prophets, that was just first century Israel, right? Currently, what do people of the world outside the church think of Jesus? According to Wikipedia, quote, he is considered by many to be one of the most influential persons to have ever lived. Jesus said that John the Baptist, there was no one greater. People, when they said Jesus was John the Baptist, they were essentially saying he was an influential person. In fact, John the Baptist had more followers than anyone around that time prior to Jesus. In fact, in John chapter 3, verse 26, it says, and they came to John and said to him, Rabbi, he who was with you across the Jordan, who's that? Jesus. To whom you bore witness, look, he is baptizing, and all are going to him. John's disciples are worried that all are going to Jesus. Fast forward to verse 30, John says, he must increase, but I must decrease. According to Wikipedia, common belief is that Jesus was one of the most influential persons to ever live. First century Israel, they believed Jesus was one of the most influential figures to ever live. They also, some thought that he was potentially Elijah reincarnate or one of the prophets. According to Wikipedia, I'm going to keep reading. Quote, in Islam, Jesus, commonly translated as Isa, is the Messiah. According to Islam, Jesus is the Messiah and one of God's highest ranked and most beloved prophets. First century Israel, they thought Jesus was a prophet. Islam says Jesus is a prophet. Have things changed? Nope. Are the same misconceptions Jesus encountered 2,000 years ago still in play today? Absolutely. But that's the world. That's outside the church. Let's zoom in a little more. Verse 29. And he asked them, but who do you say that I am? Who do you say that I am? Peter answered him, you are the Christ. And we praise Peter for this revelation. But you know what? Knowing that Jesus, believing that he is the Messiah, is not enough. Islam believes that Jesus is the Messiah. The teachings of Islam believe that Jesus is the Messiah. Continuing to read from Wikipedia, Islam considers Jesus to be neither the incarnation nor the Son of God. They believe he's the Messiah, but they do not believe that he is God or the Son of God. Verse 31, and he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed and after 3 days rise again. And he said this plainly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man. Peter just confessed that Jesus is the Messiah. And then Jesus rebuked Peter. Peter had a revelation about who the Father is, or who Jesus is from who? The Father. The only way anyone can believe that Jesus is the Messiah is by the Father, but it's not enough to have that revelation. There is a greater revelation that is needed to understand not just Jesus' title and his role, but what he's really about. Not just coming to him and say, I know that guy, but do you really know him intimately? So much so that you fellowship with his sufferings. As he suffers, you suffer the same way. It was not enough for Peter to believe that Jesus was the Messiah. Jesus still rebuked him because he had a misconception. He had a misconception about what he had signed up for. Even though Peter had his theology right, his heart was wrong. His theology was correct, but his heart was wrong. Messiah, I'm going to rebuke you, Jesus. No way you're going to suffer. No way I have to suffer, Jesus. This is not part of the plan. And certainly not at the hands of the religious leaders. But as we see play out in the New Testament, the Gospels and Acts specifically, who is Jesus persecuted by primarily? Who instigates the persecution? The religious leaders, the equivalent of the first century equivalent of 21st century pastors persecute Jesus more than anybody. Jesus just said who was going to put him to death. Peter's like, no way. No way. These people are for you, God. They're for you. They're for the Messiah. Peter could not accept that. These pastors, they're definitely for you, Jesus. But not only did these people, not only were they opposed to Jesus and Antichrist, but they ended up having a jealous, murderous spirit to the point that they put him to death. I got a question. What is a spleen? S-P-L-E-E-N. What's a spleen? Anybody? Yes. It is an organ in the human body. And before this morning, that's all I knew about it as well. I know what a spleen is. It's in my body and it does something. It's an organ of the body, correct. And Jesus is the Messiah, correct. All Christians know and believe that. But only God, doctors, and Google know the purpose, the deeper meaning of why the spleen is there. In my body, in your body. The spleen fights invading germs in the blood. The spleen contains infection-fighting white blood cells. It controls the level of blood cells, white blood cells, red blood cells, and platelets. It filters the blood and removes old or damaged red blood cells. Jesus is like a spleen. But we don't see him as a spleen. We see him as adding to our life, not taking anything away. But a spleen filters out and removes old or damaged red blood cells. It fights. I said fights, yes. It fights invading germs in the blood. Jesus ultimately came to remove, to take away. Did you hear that? He came to remove, to take away the curse from our bloodline, the curse of Adam. Romans 5:12, therefore, just as through one man sin entered the world, and death through sin, and thus death spread to all men because all sinned. For until the law, sin was in the world, but sin is not imputed when there is no law. Nevertheless, death reigned from Adam to Moses, even over those who had not sinned according to the likeness of the transgression of Adam, who is a type of him who was to come. Ooh, getting excited. Verse 15, but the free gift is not like the offense. But if by the one man's offense many died, much more the grace of God and the gift by the grace of the one man, Jesus Christ, abounded to many. And the gift is not like that which came through the one who sinned. For the judgment which came from one offense resulted in condemnation, but the free gift which came from many offenses resulted in justification. But if by one man's offense death reigned through the one, much more those who receive abundance of grace and of the gift of righteousness will reign in life through the one Jesus Christ. He came to take away and to replace. He took away the old. He took away the death. Oh, death, where is your sting? And he came to impute or to give to us, to put into our account his righteousness. But you know what I think we forget sometimes? He also came not to just help us personally, individually, although when we think of life, we look at it through the lens of ourselves often, right? We're like, what's in it for me? And we think if there was only one person on earth, Jesus still would have died for me. And that's so true. But there's something else that Jesus did in the process of all this. He came as an invader. He came to invade and shake up and actually bring to rubble the institutional religious establishment of the day. Do you know that? He came to remove the old blood cells as well. Mark 2:21, no one sews a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment. If he does, the patch tears away from it. The new from the old, and a worse tear is made. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins. If he does, the wine will burst the skins, and the wine is destroyed. And so are the skins. But the new wine is for fresh wineskins. This is an additional explanation about what I just read from Romans chapter 5. The law is the old wineskins. The law, you can't live according to the law and live. Because you can't keep the law. I can't keep the law. If we live according to the law, in other words, if we try to do good and say, you know what, I've done enough good, I'm good to go before God, we're going to die according to the law. Because the law reigned until Moses, but when Jesus came, he brought a new law, the law of grace, which is greater than that which has passed away. Right. It's a greater glory the Bible talks about. So Jesus came to do away, he came to do away with some stuff. There are people who still live as if the old law is something we are required to fulfill when Jesus fulfilled it. Right. But if you live according to the law, you die according to it because no one can keep it. Jesus came also to fight, as I mentioned earlier, the invading germs, the invading leaven of the Pharisees. He came to destroy. He said, not one stone will be left upon another. And in 70 AD, that actually happened. The temple was torn down. I've been to Israel. You can see the stones on the ground that were destroyed when the Romans invaded Jerusalem. And he's still doing that today. This is what Jesus says. This is what he came to do. Therefore, I tell you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a people producing its fruits. And the one who falls on this stone will be broken to pieces, and when it falls on anyone, it will crush him. Usually we stop right there. And we go, man, that's a good quotable right there. When the chief priests and Pharisees heard his parables, they perceived that he was speaking about them. Matthew 21:43 through 45. When the chief priests and the Pharisees heard his parables, they perceived that he was speaking about them. Jesus came to the first century pastors and he says, this is going to be taken away from you because you don't have fruits that are real. So Jesus came as an invader to remove the leaven of the Pharisees, just like the spleen comes as to remove foreign invaders. Jesus is like a spleen. It's interesting because this came to me this morning when I was studying, I paused for a second, all of a sudden I just heard spleen. And I just started typing, I was like, what is a spleen? I don't know what a spleen is. So I Google it and I look it up. And how interestingly that it lines up with the ministry of Jesus, its purpose. Obviously, Jesus created the spleen, so there's pictures in what he created. So, who do American Christians say that Jesus is? Do they say and see that Jesus came as an invader to take down the religious system of the day that is not in alignment with him, and that his ministry continues to this day? Do people see Jesus like that? No, they don't. Not at all. They see Jesus as nice, don't say anything offensive, especially not of leaders. Especially don't say anything mean and cruel and offensive against pastors and leaders. Definitely don't do that. Be afraid of that at all costs. But that's exactly the people that Jesus called out as being sons of the devil in John chapter 8. And making converts twice the son of hell as themselves. And falling into a pit as well as their followers because they were blind guides. And being whitewashed tombs looking good on the inside, but on the inside, dead men's bones. First century pastors. And we say, you know what, we can't say anything mean against pastors. We can't say anything truthful against pastors in 21st century America. But does not Acts chapter 1, verse 1 say that the Gospels are about what Jesus began to do and to say? He just began to do something. Who's continuing it? His body. Has that part of Jesus' ministry as an invader to take down the religious system of the day that is quote unquote Christian, do you think Peter rebuked him for it? Peter said, don't you dare, Jesus, say that. They're not going to hurt you, they're for you. Peter didn't see it. Are there any Christians you know that don't see this? Is this talked about? No. Is the devil in the church? Yes. You guys pause for a second. If I were the devil, there would be no better place to hide. It would not be in a bar. It would not be in all the places we think he would hide. The number one place the angel of light hides is where there's false light. I got a question. Is Jesus about peace? Yep. Galatians says that he is our peace. But what if you don't submit to the real Jesus? Victoria's been reading her Bible. Matthew chapter 10, verse 34. Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. Who said that? Do American Christians have a perception of Jesus being the Prince of Peace? Yes, he is the Prince of Peace. Do you think that I have come to bring peace on the earth? I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. Jesus is a homewrecker. And a person's enemies will be those of his own household. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. So if this was the litmus test of a true Christian, how many would be left in the American church?
Not very many.
I told you guys the way just keeps getting narrower and narrower and narrower the more we learn about him. And whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. I got to get my kids in this and I got to do that for them. I got to, what is Jesus telling you to do for your kids? I got to have them in sports and everything else. But my kids don't like that. Who cares? And whoever does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. I don't like this. I don't care. Jesus said it. Whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Jim Elliot said, "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose." And that was shortly before his life was taken as a missionary by the people who he shared the gospel with. They killed him. He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. So Jesus says, verse 39, whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. One of the earmarks of true Christian gatherings is that my friend pool will grow. I will find a good wife, a good husband, and I can join my family on a Sunday in my Sunday best, and we can all be together and sing Kumbaya. Isn't that correct? Luke 14:25. Now great crowds accompanied him, and he turned and said to them, to the crowds who thronged around Jesus, his popularity was growing. He had the crowd's ear. I'm sure Jesus had some really good techniques about how to increase popularity, capitalize on his growing popularity, and use it to his own benefit. I'm sure he did, because that's what we need to do. Verse 26, if anyone comes to me, this is what he says to the crowds as they're following him. He turns around to them. If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. According to the context of Luke chapter 14 and Matthew chapter 10, specifically, what does it mean to take up your cross? People have imposed all these meanings upon that. And I'm not going to go through them all because I'm sure you've heard of a litany of different options about what it means to take up your cross. Specifically, according to our Master Jesus, the King of creation, the God of the universe, he says that taking up your cross means saying no to your family and no to your friends and following him, even if they hate you and lie about you and come against you and never talk to you again. Most Christians stay at the church where they are because they're afraid of their family and their